great interest. Putin has left him as foreign minister for a very long time, must be 8 years now, so clearly he has Putin's confidence, and he is tough.
Yes, I can see that.
He used to, when he was at the UN, there was a blanket ban on smoking in the UN building from Kofi Annan. He just ignored it. He used to light up in Annan's presence, you know. So no, I think he would have been very pleased. See, the background there was Rudd had asked him not to go to Fiji. He didn't, I don't know what he said to Lavrov, but I know he asked. And so maybe Lavrov was, as it were, laying down a marker saying, mate, I can eat you.
Yeah.
When it comes to diplomacy, you may be good, I'm better.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes. The view about small states, didn't Russia learn anything about Afghanistan?
That's a terrific question. The subject here is Europe. Otherwise, it's hard to talk about Russia, and it's never be Russia without talking about Afghanistan. Obviously, the Russians learned lessons from Afghanistan, and they lose no opportunity to say that to the Americans, you might have consulted us. We could have told you a thing or two about Afghanistan, because there was a humiliation of Russian arms in Afghanistan. There's a terrific Russian film about, and a war I think about Afghanistan, which you can get, I think it's called the 9th Brigade. And there's a scene there in which a GRU colonel is preparing some special forces, some SAS troops to go in, and he says to them, no one in history has ever successfully tamed Afghanistan. So I can only answer your question by saying the Russians learned something about Afghanistan. They knew that part of the world was difficult. They should never have gone in. I think they know that. And they went in because Brezhnev decided to go in. He had advice saying, don't go in. The military were very uneasy about it. The Russian military was trained to fight a war in Poland against the United States, Germany, and Britain on the flat plains of Europe. And his generals pointed out, you're not trained for that desert mountain warfare. But Brezhnev took the decision, the fateful decision of war.
I'd just like to get 2 points of view. Obviously the former satellite Soviet states, what is their feeling towards the Russians and what is the Russians' feeling towards them? So maybe one can answer the Russian perspective, one can answer the small states perspective.
It depends who you ask, probably. in the satellite states, I'm sure there is many people who still feel very resentful towards, I would say, Soviet Union, but they drag it into the present towards Russia. We just had the first round of a presidential election, first round of direct voting for a Czech president. And being a pro-Russian or an anti-Russian candidate was one of the most important aspects of the election. So it is still an issue. And in sports, for example, when the Czech team plays Russia, it's always a big deal, and they tend to say this is for the 68.
Yeah.
And it's young people who don't not only remember, but don't even learn in school about the 68. So it's more present than it should be.
Can I just add one important thing here? I don't think the Russians pay much attention to soft power. Ultimately, I think they think it doesn't matter. We know soft power does matter. And Russia gets a pretty bad press, sometimes with very good reason, it seems to me. It's not a matter of bias. And the Russians can be their own worst enemy. You are school teachers. And I was saying to one of your colleagues earlier that, in my view, no one contributed more to the downfall of the Soviet Union than the Soviet school teachers, because they brought up a generation of people who were able to think independently and to say this system ain't working. But the most recently published guide for Russian history teachers, published in 2006 by a school textbook commission appointed by Mr. Putin, contains the following lines. This is a guide for history teachers, it's not the actual textbook. Most members of the Russian political class consider Russia's present borders unnatural because they do not guarantee Russia's security. If you write that in a textbook, does not an Estonian or a Ukrainian or a Belarusian citizen have a right to say, why is that there?
Is there any allusion to where they should be?
Well, the response would be, it's a school textbook. We don't control the school textbook.
Okay.
Perhaps one more. We done? Sorry.
Just quick one. Kyle, just quick question. You know, we heard a lot in Australia, we hear a lot about Asian values. You know, Asian values standing for non-intervention in other Asian countries' sovereign affairs, etc., etc. Can we say, based on what you just elaborated, that Russia then really has so-called Asian values?
Well, first of all, sorry, I don't want to be mealy mouthed about this and engage in bureaucratic weasel words. I think the whole notion of Asian values is bunk. I've never seen them actually. I've never seen them defined for me. What are Asian values? Shark fin soup? Is that Asian values? Killing off the elephants for ivory, is that Asian values? Suppression of dissenting opinion, is that an Asian value? I'd like to see these Asian values defined for me. They've never been defined for me.
Filial piety would be one.
Sorry?
Filial piety would be one.
Filial piety is certainly one. I had 5 years in China. So I challenge the premise of your question, but what I would say is that the Russians themselves point out that aspects of their politics are the words you would know. They use 2 words, Asiatic and Byzantine. And for instance, that notion that whenever the leader, the Tsar, receives a foreign guest, he or she, it's always a he these days, is surrounded by this huge entourage of people who by their public abasement, because by the way, when you're waiting for Putin, you're not allowed to speak. So prime ministers, deputy prime ministers, serious ministers spend 2 hours doodling on their iPads. They could be doing business together. But no, court etiquette says you don't speak while you're waiting for the leader. Oh, by the way, there's the Russian saying that says, Putin's meetings never start, he is never late. Meetings always start at the appointed time. That is, when he's 2 hours late. So the Russians themselves would say that some aspects of their political system are, and they use it with Asiatsky, Byzantinsky. So they use that word, so we can use that word without being accused, I think, of some sort of racial stereotype.
I'm sorry, I just got one really quick question for the 2 young Europeans that are with us. Are you optimistic about the future of your countries and the EU as a...
Oh, well, yeah,
Future of our country in the EU.
Well, perhaps just your country, because I know we're running out of time. Yeah.
no, it's this is a really individual question or person, as I understand it, and unlike most of the Czechs, I would say, I am really optimistic about our future and about our future in the EU, and now they would stone me if I said that back home, probably even in the Eurozone. So
Yes.
that's not a majority.
And Teresa?
Yes, even more so after a year in Australia.
Let's
an optimistic note, I'm going to finish our time here today. Again, thank you very much indeed to Kyle and Teresa for their work in that session. Again,